So this section on baseball, we're actually going to use some of the products of Performance Health and actually see how and use it in the concepts of, number one, baseball training for velocity on a fastball, also for training and prevention of things like Tommy John injury, rotator cuff tears. So we're going to show you some demos both on the video and also with our model here, John. Understand that we're going to go through the concept of why we're doing the training that we're doing with the end result in mind. So first thing we're going to show on the video, when you look at pitching, one of the things that we notice a lot of is that the initiation of momentum in pitching is one of the things that we see there's a lack of sometimes in mechanics. So one of the things we're doing with our pitchers is actually teaching them to initiate a lean before they actually starting their movement towards the plate. So the idea of using the band resistance with it is actually to give them a trigger. Face this way, John. Now left leg up, okay, and just lean forward, okay? Back, left leg up, and then lean your butt into me, okay? Left leg up, lean your butt into me. So the lean is actually what we're trying to train. So as the foot comes up, lean in. On the video, you see, as he initiates his elevation of his foot, he's actually started his movement towards the plate. And the idea is that movement towards the plate builds momentum from the ground up and actually accelerates the effect that they can create arm speed, but also uses less load on the elbow and the shoulder to create that arm speed. Next thing we're going to show you is taking it to the next level. There's a concept called equal and opposite with pitching. The idea is that the front side shoulder is a mirror image of the back side shoulder. One thing we need to understand is in pitching and in all this sequencing, the lower extremity is the trigger. So the idea is we have to train the lower extremity in the same mantra as we do the upper extremity. So the things that's going to save our shoulders and saves our elbow is actually hip activation here. So what we have our model doing in the video is he's actually initiating pitching and then coming to an equal and opposite position. So John, initiate a pitch, come to an equal and opposite and stop. Go back, initiate a pitch, equal and opposite and stop. Good, and back down. So you understand here with the pitcher that's pitching, he's actually initiating his lean. He's got hip activation. So part of his warm-up before he actually throws a ball is going to initiate hip activation first. So now you see this kind of in full motion in the video. Right now we got two of our players we're going to show you here. Both of these guys throw mid-90s. If you look at the initiation of his throw, watch his initiation, how he leans forward and finishes with the backside hip up. The other thing to understand is that in pitching motion, when we talk about equal and opposite, when the front side shoulder goes down, the back leg has to come up as kind of a counterweight coming up. That deceleration pattern, okay, we're training now by using the tubing with Velcro. So the tubing with Velcro, again, can be used in the form of throwing. Next video we have another pitcher, another guy throws 90, 95. We look at him, this is kind of a different body type. Guy's 6'8", initiates a lot of arm speed, but you notice his backside hip is helping decelerate that pattern. And what we're doing with the band is not so much resistance to kind of create resistance, it's resistance to facilitate that pattern. Their brain thinks of what their deceleration pattern should look like. What's interesting is as we train the lower body, his upper body, his arm slot stays consistent, and we're trying to build consistency in the training. Taking it to another level, we take to CLX, which is the new CLX band that we have now, and we're actually using it to kind of do a total body activation. This is one of our quarterbacks who came to us with issues with shoulder pain. One of the things we did to get him back into pitching, into throwing, was actually to utilize the CLX to stimulate the whole posterior chain and then mimic that with a developmental movement. You're going to see more and more is that as we train our athletes, we're going back to developmental movements like crawling, rolling, that kind of thing. And initiate this kind of thing because it facilitates scapular stabilization, core activation, and hip activation all at once. So that's the best way for us to kind of know that we're stimulating the whole system, not just one component. I'm not against rotator cuff strengthening. I'm not against rotator cuff activation in single planes, but if we don't do things as a total body activation, we miss the boat. Next thing you need when we deal with adding velocity or actually going to the next level of pitching, we have to do things so our players can get violent, where our players can initiate speed under control. If you notice here, he's actually using the tubing with Velcro in the same manner we did earlier, kind of teaching the pitching mechanics, but also using it to teach acceleration through. So when it comes down to in range, to actually creating velocity, we can use these component movements to kind of facilitate a whole body movement, and also looking at adding velocity. So now our velocity training with weighted balls is now a whole body pattern, not just one component of it. If we break down the body and throwing into one component like elbow, shoulder, we miss the boat. We can do that partially, but in order to fully train, we've got to initiate the whole body movement. And we have to find a way to actually train them with aggressiveness and with velocity. Now you see us using a flex bar. Right here in this video, perturbation training in components of movement. So perturbation training with components of movement actually lets us stimulate them in parts of the planes of the movement. You notice here, his elbow is in the deceleration position. So John, get kind of in a deceleration position. So if he's a left-handed player, this is how we're going to set him up. Front side elbow in, top side elbow at deceleration, and he's going to actually initiate kind of perturbations across the plane, okay? I'm getting activation of posterior cuff, posterior chain. The other thing I'm looking at is hip activation on contralateral side. When we look at a warm-up or a sequencing of warm-ups either between pitches or between innings or as a part of a warm-up for throwing, we want to kind of look at this pattern, especially at the top of the throw. Next thing we're going to do is same sequencing, but at the bottom of deceleration. Notice now he's already kind of, ball release is gone and he's here. Most of our injuries occur after the ball is gone. So we want them to be able to stimulate once the release of the ball goes and they whip through. You also notice his chest is not so much facing down, it's facing across. Okay? Part of the problem is that we want to absorb load through the lumbar spine and the backside hip, not load into the shoulder itself. If he's up this way and he initiates finishing, he's going to do posterior cuff. He's going to tear up his posterior cuff. We have to absorb it all the way through. So teaching him to kind of do perturbation training at the deceleration pattern lets his brain know where he needs to finish. It's not here, they have to finish all the way to here. Got it? Now we get into core activation for a baseball player. One thing we want to be able to do is, if you look at this, right shoulders is involved shoulder. So he's going to get into a plank position, John. Okay? One arm up and perturbate here. So what we're doing is we're perturbating. This shoulder is our stabilization shoulder, and it's creating kind of a pattern of stabilization. Notice here, John is actually perturbating, but he's stabilizing on this contralateral side. Up, perfect. See the video we have here, and again, everything we're doing here for training is part of their dynamic warm-up. That's kind of the cool part. They need to do this before they actually pick up a ball and throw. Now let's talk about hitting, okay? You notice the CLX here, we've actually wrapped the CLX around the backside hip, okay? And we've initiated, okay, hip movement for the backside. So this is a kid that's now training to actually hit the ball. And his first movement is right leg internal rotation as he hips through. So the idea now is he's connected backside hip to front side hip with hitting. So with John, okay, foot through. So I can wrap around, actually, create an internal rotation vector here. Okay, I get into a batting position. Okay. So his initial movement, this is actually facilitating the backside knee coming in as he kind of comes through and hits, okay? So coming through and hitting. So if you look at this player here, we just got a medicine ball there as a means of activation. So how do you get violent through the hitting space or through the throwing place and still create stability from the ground up? The other thing to keep in mind is that hitting and pitching very similar when it comes to the body's activation. The end result may be here or the end result may be here, but it's still a summation of forces from the ground up that actually releases through the hand or through the hands here. Now, start getting a little bit more dynamic in pitching in the video here. Now we actually have our guy on the mound, okay? And depending on how we wrap the CLX can create what kind of vector we're trying to train here. So here, he's actually coming through. Now, what's this for? It's for the backside arm not to elevate too soon through in the throwing mechanics. So the idea is when you're throwing and you come here, if a player does this too early, they're going to open up early. They come up here and stay low. They'll stay behind the ball and finish and go through the ball. CLX here, he can actually throw a baseball with it and feel the lack of the compensation from the backside elbow. It stays lower. It does not raise it above the AC joint, and that's what we're trying to initiate. And if you notice, he's going to come through and he'll finish what we say behind the ball. So instead of being here, he'll be here, behind the ball. That ability to be behind the ball limits the chance of him opening up his elbow and opening up his shoulder. The next thing we're doing is that a lot of our players, when it comes down to part of their component training that's in their day-to-day strength training, they'll do this as part of our kind of dynamic warm-up and our dynamic stimulation for any sport. So any sport that we have, they're doing components of this. There's no machine in the world that I can do that can activate this system in both a crawl position and to the dynamic loading position. I can only do it with a CLX. I can only do it with that. This is one of our Olympic lifters, and if you check him out, we're actually initiating roll sequencing with him with crawling, okay? This is somebody that is an elite athlete that when we have him do this stuff, we actually can break him down even though he knows how to use his body. It's the same stuff we may have any of our athletes that have a dynamic, both upper body and lower body sequence of events. So hitting a volleyball, throwing a baseball, swinging a ball, it's all the same thing as far as a total body from the ground up activation. What's funny, it's kind of a bad video, but look how she rolls and she presses up from there. Instead of rolling up to a full position like he did, she doesn't initiate a good roll. Roll and press up. So an elite athlete doesn't understand how to do these basic sequencing. So just like SFMA and all these functional movement screens, this is a way for us to kind of screen for some issues with our athletes. Our bread and butter training for hip activation is this combination here. So we have our players come in, this is part of their dynamic warm-up every time they're there. Before they do anything upper body, they're going to activate lower body with this. So we'll have a monster walk, and then they'll Groucho walk forward and back. So we'll do a combination of hip activation, and they're going to finish with some type of push or pull. Push could be a plank, push could be a push-up, push could be a crawl. So we're going to do the same sequencing. It gets to be really simple when you understand how the body learns movement based on developmental kinesiology and applying it in sport. So, the idea here is that when you look at an athlete, depending on what their end result is, remember it's a total body activation that needs to be initiated. By using these products, it's the best way for us to actually initiate that training both in season, out of season, warm up, and actually to maintain their performance throughout the sport.